In the 20th century, we had 2 world wars and an insane amount of stories came out of it. Stories that are real, but yet unbelievable. One of those stories is the story of this soldier's life, Sergey Aleshkov. Sergey Aleshkov is the youngest soldier in World War II. But how old is he to be the youngest soldier in this war? Is he 15? No. Is he 12? No, he's much younger than that. Is he 6? Yes, this soldier was 6 years old. And he was in one of the most brutal fronts in World War II history, the Eastern Front, when the Germans were fighting the Russians. In the year 1941, when the Germans decided to attack the Soviet Union, you could say the Russians were very surprised and it was completely unexpected. Since the Germans' goal was to reach Moscow, the Russians were on their feet to fight back as quickly as possible. So a giant army was formed to fight back. But the thing was, most of the army was very young, under the age of 18. But a 15-year-old sounds reasonable for then. But why is a 6-year-old in the Red Army? The way this young man entered the Red Army has its own story. When the German army enters the Soviet Union and it's heading towards Moscow, Sergey and his mother and 2 brothers are living in a village near the city of Kaluga, Russia. This little village in the city of Kaluga was chosen for the Red Army to camp at and wait for the German army to show up and fight them. But at this time, the German army was so strong that it quickly took over this village, killed every Russian army man, and took everybody, like Sergey's mother and 2 brothers. And the child was left alone in the village because they didn't need him for anything. Since the entire village was basically killed or taken as prisoner, Sergey was all by himself and he was hiding. After the Germans took over the village, they didn't need to stay there. They needed to head towards Moscow, which was about 200 kilometers away. And when the Red Army or the Russians realized that the Germans had gone, they re-entered this village to figure out a tactic on how to fight the Germans. And once they get to this village, they're confronted with something surprising. A 6-year-old that doesn't have anyone with him, no parents, no brothers, nobody, and he's just sitting under a tree crying. The good thing is it was summer, because if it wasn't, it would have been too cold and he might have died from hypothermia. The Russian soldiers find this boy and take him back to the base. The commander of this group was called Mikhail Vorobiev, and he saw the shape the little boy was in and he felt extremely bad. So he decided to adopt him. Mikhail was not married and didn't have a wife, so he appointed one of the nurses with him to take care of the little boy. The reason Mikhail didn't send this little boy to an orphanage, because he knew at that time in the Soviet Union, there's a high chance this kid would die from starvation. So he decided to keep it with him and take him everywhere he went. After a few months, they're appointed to one of the most brutal battles, Stalingrad, and they were forced to take Sergey with him. Anywhere this unit that Sergey was a part of would have a battle, he would stay in the back and sometimes even help them, like bring them food or drinks. One time when Mikhail's army was appointed to a section, but they didn't realize that some German forces are nearby and they're lurking in one of the haze in the field. They were on the lookout to tell their men to shoot mortar at this unit. But it seems like Sergey was the only one that was paying attention, because as soon as he saw the haystacks move, he told his adopted father Mikhail that I think I see something in the field, and Mikhail tells his men to go check. After that, they realized that there are German men inside the hay hiding, so they decided to fire at them. Even though Sergey was a little boy and he was 6, but he paid attention to everything. Like for example, there was a lot of mortar strikes and it killed a lot of their unit, but one of those soldiers got buried underneath the dirt and knocked out. And if Sergey didn't see that Russian soldier get buried underneath the dirt, he wouldn't have lived. But he told the commander that there is a soldier under there. They dug him out, and it looked like he was alive, and if he didn't say that, he would have died. Since Sergey did a lot of heroic things in the unit he was in, the stories were passing around like wildfire, and different commanders heard about him. And one of them suggested that he deserves a medal for what he does. And in 1943, he got the Medal for Combat Merit. And another interesting fact is that until then, he did not have the military clothes he needed. He just walked around in normal clothing. But since he received a military medal, they also gave him a uniform. One of the other soldiers that realized that he got a uniform now sewed a military rank together and put it on his shoulders. A rank that was a lieutenant. And after the patch was added to his uniform, everybody referred to him as Junior Lieutenant. Sergey was very happy about his uniform, but it also came with a lot of baggage. Because when he was wearing normal clothes, the enemy would not fire at him since he looked like a civilian. But after he put on a military uniform, from a faraway distance, he looked like a short soldier, so he was fired at plenty of times. After Sergey got the medal and the uniform, he became very famous in the Red Army, and you could say everybody had heard a story about him. In the higher levels of the Soviet army, there was a marshal named Vasily Chuikov. When the news about the little junior got to Chuikov's ear, he said he has to meet him. So the next time he had a chance, he got to meet Sergey. Marshal Chuikov liked this kid so much that he also gave him a souvenir, a Browning Colt, and he said each soldier needs his own weapon. But after he gave the souvenir to the little kid, he felt bad for him and said to his adopted father, "Why is this young boy in the war zone?" Since Mikhail didn't have anyone to take care of him, he decided to take him everywhere he went. Marshal Chuikov suggests to send him to Tula, to one of the best schools there, and he'll take care of everything. You could say Sergey got the best deal of his life. He didn't have to be in a war zone, and he got to go to a proper school. After the Soviet Union defeated Nazi Germany, they didn't forget about him in terms of medal, so he also received the Medal of Victory. Even though Sergey had a terrible childhood, he lost his mother and 2 brothers, but with the help of his adopted father and Marshal Chuikov, he went to school and eventually went to becoming a lawyer. It really shows that if you want it, you will get it. For most of his life, he lived in the city of Chelyabinsk in Russia, but unfortunately, he dies too soon. In the year 1990, at the age of 54, Sergey gets a heart attack and dies. But Sergey Aleshkov wasn't the only kid in the Red Army. At that time in the Red Army, there were plenty of kids as soldiers, and a lot of them were under the age of 15, so it wasn't as crazy as a 6-year-old. A lot of Russian historians believe that with the help of these kids, they wouldn't be able to defeat the Germans, a victory that killed a lot of Russians. To stop the Germans, they would basically hand a weapon to any boy or man and tell them to keep on fighting. And sometimes it was so bad that they didn't have enough weapons for the amount of men in an area. So they would tell a person to run behind a soldier with a weapon. If he dies, pick up his weapon and start fighting. And that is why in the Soviet army, more than 10 million soldiers died, while on the other side, Germany had about 5 million killed. These amounts are only the military. We're not counting the civilians. And if you would like to see, it's the orange mark. This was the life of the youngest soldier in World War II.